He's here. He's here. Now, in a random student media building, deep in the bowels of the recording studio, under the wooden plaster of a marked building, we once again make contact with our lead analyst, Scott Harris.
Hey, people, Scott here. Welcome back to Capitol Hill Landscaping with Scotty. A lot has happened in recent months. A lot of interesting stuff. I want to first start off talking about all the wacky shenanigans and railroad incident that happened in Ohio a couple of weeks back. If you don't know, there was a train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, which is this little border town, less than 10,000 people. That sits, right on the Ohio-Pennsylvania border. So anyways, there was a train derailment, which you hear that out loud, you don't think, train derailment, how does that even happen? But regardless, so this train derailed, fell apart, broke apart, all the cars went flying everywhere, train cars and whatnot, and it just so happens, there's a bunch of very dangerous chemicals that were being transported by this train. And, of course, when the derailment happened, the cars broke and the chemicals started, spilling out into the ground. Not great. When teams arrived on the scene to assess the situation, it was notified to the governor, Mark DeWine, that the best way to deal with the contamination was to burn all the chemicals. That would then go directly into the atmosphere. Yeah. Not great. Not a good look. There's been reports about the town, basically the water not being drinkable. I saw a statistic that said some tens of thousands of animals have died. There's been ash spotted in certain areas in the surrounding area and states of kind of like this ash that's kind of corroding on cars. And obviously, why did this happen? Well, it's quite interesting. People are trying to point the finger at people. The Biden administration is kind of pointing the finger at Trump and his administration, which is weird because the sort of deregulation of the trains started with Obama and were implemented by Trump. And then the Biden admin, FDR incarnate, basically did jack. And Pete Buttigieg, the Secretary of Transportation, basically said he can't keep getting away with this. How on earth could this have happened under my watch? I'd like to remind everybody that the Democrats broke a rail strike that would have probably, if the strike went through fully and all their demands were met, would have prevented this horrific ecological disaster from happening to begin with. Not gonna lie, it's not good. Coincidentally, funnily enough, at the same time, the U.S. government spent billions and billions of dollars shooting down some weather balloons. First off, the Chinese government apparently had a weather balloon that was going over the entire U.S., over Montana. It was shot down in South Carolina, or at least one of the Carolinas. Really interesting, odd stuff. What's weird is that the Chinese government fully admitted that it was their balloon and that it was there for just weather research purposes. But it's interesting, to say the least. But then there was another UFO sighted over Canada, in which the U.S. acted on that and shot down a weather balloon there. And now there was reports about some weather enthusiasts and their balloons being shot down. The biggest takeaway from this, obviously, is that a single jet fighter launching a missile to shoot down a balloon cost about $400 million. Yeah. Woo! But, the full fallout of the train derailment in the Palestine, in East Palestine, really comes down to the arrival of former President Donald Trump. You see, on President's Day, President Biden decided to go to Kiev and Eastern Europe in general to kind of go on this sort of NATO grandstanding, we got your back, Ukraine, no matter what happens, we got you kind of tour, essentially. And Biden, on the same day, went to East Palestine, Ohio, and bought everybody in the town McDonald's and bottled water. Now, what kind of picture does this paint? Well, it seems like for Biden, it paints a picture of, oh, I'm going to deal with foreign affairs and stuff like that and go to Europe on President's Day. Meanwhile, my basically main opponent is going to go to the town which I could have technically, hypothetically prevented the accident from happening if, I didn't break up a rail strike, essentially, to get the trains moving on time and whatnot. For Trump, anyways, it makes him kind of down to earth, which is a skill that he's kind of always had. That's why a lot of people are drawn to Trump, because, he's the one that can actually feel somewhat down to earth, even though he's just as part of the establishment, honestly, as Biden is, but I digress. So, where does that lead us? Well, 2024, still months and months, and, well, in fact, a year away. It's going to come up sooner than we thought, honestly. So, who are the candidates so far? Who is in charge? Who's going to lead? Well, we have actually a declared candidate for the Democrats named Marina Wilson. Or, excuse me, not Maria. Well, Marianne Williamson, who's an author and activist who was in the running for president in 2020. She's the only officially declared Democrat candidate so far. In terms of the Republicans, Trump has his first official challenger being Nikki Haley, former UN ambassador and former governor of South Carolina. Of course, Trump kind of pointed it out, but I kind of agree with him on this, that Nikki Haley will probably get 1 to 2% of the vote, honestly, in terms of the primaries. Which leaves us to the biggest question of all. Where is DeSantis? Is he going to run? Maybe. Probably. I don't know. He's got a few months. Campaign season starts in August, September, and around that time. So we'll see soon. There's a Fox. DeSantis actually went on Fox News, Fox and Friends, the show, to be specific, and kind of hinted that he was running. Which, so maybe. However, what's interesting is now Trump has kind of bounced back in many of the polls for the nomination. After the midterms, which was basically a squeaky victory for the Republicans, Trump seemed to be like he was out, like he was done. He was donezo. Zip. Done. But now he's gaining some ground back. And it makes you think, why is that? Why is this the case? Well, I don't know, actually. I personally don't have a clue. I mean, the establishment sure doesn't want Trump, that's for sure. They want DeSantis. They want somebody else who can actually, beat Biden on a national level. But granted, I can maybe see why. After all, Trump lost to Biden to only less than 60,000 votes in 3 states, which isn't really that hard of a number to, gain back, in all honesty. The only poll, actually, that I saw where DeSantis was over was over Trump was in California, which I learned today that actually has the highest amount of registered Republicans out of any state. Which, saying that out loud, makes me realize that makes a lot of sense, because California is the largest state in the United States. Not in terms of geography or size, but, population, of course. Now, what makes this interesting is this competition can really still go several ways, honestly. Could it be a repeat of 2000? Maybe. Could it be a repeat of 2020? Also maybe. Could it be a repeat of 1912? Oh, absolutely. It just really depends on if DeSantis runs or not. And I haven't even talked about Biden yet. Biden is now in this predicament, I would say. His administration has failed to basically fulfill most of its main promises, and what little it's done has basically said, oh, well, we're doing the bare minimum, so you should elect me again, of course. However, it's come increasingly obvious that the left or the progressive wing is not backing Biden anymore, obviously. Essentially, if you don't know, the progressives were basically the key to helping Biden win. Without the progressive vote, Biden would have lost in 2020, but they showed up because everybody hated Trump, and they built this kind of coalition around the Dems and around Biden. And, yeah, that's history in 2020. But, however, many progressives and leftists that voted for Biden in 2020 are not looking to vote for him in 2024. For the simple fact, really, that he just hasn't done all that he's promised to do. Now, why is that? Well, simply put, Biden is a hardliner the establishment. The only thing that separates him from, say, Nancy Pelosi is that he actually doesn't participate in, like, stock trading. If you don't know, many members of Congress kind of use their power to effectively do legal insider trading. A very famous example is when Nancy Pelosi and her husband invested in a bunch of these electronic vehicle companies, and then a week later it was announced that basically the fleets of the president's vehicles are all going electric. What a coinkydink, if you ask me. But it's not just Democrats that do this. Every politician on the aisle. Like, not every single one. There's some that, have principles, but those principles still, give them a 6-figure salary, book deals, other means of making money. Like, Joe Biden, for example, like, he never participated in stock trading when, he was in Congress. He probably made millions off his book, though. I have it. I think it's So Promise Me, Dad is the title of his book. I bought it at a Goodwill a few months ago, or a year ago. I haven't opened it yet. But anywho, I want to go on a bit of a tangent about kind of what Biden has done in terms of a left or progressive Democrat perspective. There's this really great account I follow. It's called Holding Biden Accountable. He's essentially critiquing the now president from a leftist point of view, and I think a lot of his points are very interesting. Essentially, he has a little chart that he keeps like updating over and over as Biden continues his presidency. Now, what's changed during office, according to him, is the amount of drilling, healthcare cost, student debt has gone up, according to him. Private poverty rates has gone up, according to him. That I can definitely see because there was the child tax credit for a while, which lifted 50% of children out of poverty. And then Biden took office, and then they just let the credit expire. So those 50% of kids that were in poverty are now back in poverty because now they don't have that money anymore. He cites that the Biden administration has enacted the largest defense spending budget in United States history. Also, withholding of money from Afghanistan, which, if you don't know, after the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan, we decided to seize all the assets of what the Afghan Republic that would have just gone to the Taliban, because they have now access to all those government resources and accounts, but we're withholding that, basically holding billions and billions from the Taliban, which on paper sounds good, but then you realize that Now, millions of Afghans are now starving and are going to further and further poverty because of the money that's being withheld. Along with citing basically arming. This account's kind of fully against any sort of intervention and arming of other nations, particularly in continued arming of Saudi Arabia in their war against Yemen, which is a very interesting conflict. I need to delve deeper onto the roots and the going-ons between that. I just remember during Trump's presidency, there was a really bombastic and famous meeting where Trump traveled to Saudi Arabia to essentially come to a arms agreement. Another interesting thing is the amount of migrants. As you may or may not know, there's been an increase in immigration into the U.S. to where ICE is a little overwhelmed, and President Biden has kind of stopped anybody coming in who's seeking asylum. Obviously, wiggling your finger doesn't do much about that, but I digress. And then obviously the rail strikes, along with, not keeping to most of his promises that he set, having all this watered down legislation that isn't really benefiting most people in the short term. It might in the long term, that remains to be seen, but we'll see. Now on to somewhere that's not the U.S. Well, specifically, it's kind of close to the U.S., but not really the U.S. El Salvador is a Central American nation. Its current president, Nayib Bukele, has been under a hot spot. Well, not really under a super hot spot, but he's getting a lot of attention from American media recently. If you don't know who he is, he was famous a few years back deciding to back his country's economy on Bitcoin. And then literally as soon as he did that, Bitcoin crashed and is now worth less than it was before. But anyways, he's back in the U.S. Limelight once again, mainly because of a massive crime crackdown that he's had, where he's essentially rounded up a bunch of gangsters in El Salvador that have been terrorizing the country and have kind of been posting, he's been posting videos of them kind of in a very dehumanized way in these mega prisons. The reason for so is, to combat the crime rate within El Salvador. And from reports from El Salvador, it appears to be working, and now President Nayib has a 92% approval rating. Something that is completely unheard of at all. The images shown are of a prison that can hold up to as many as 40,000 inmates. 32 cells, 100 prisoners each. Each cell is 2 sinks and 2 toilets only. Now, it's been under a lot of fire from groups kind of calling the area to be extremely, dehumanizing. The videos are literally guys in, white boxer shorts and nothing else. But so far, about 64,000 gang members have been rounded up, and they're predominantly belonging to MS-13 and Barrow 18. Some gangs, MS-13 was in the news cycle in the U.S. a little while ago for kind of being in Trump's vocal patterns for a hot minute. But anyways, I want to thank you all for listening. This has been Capitol Hill Landscaping with Scotty, and I will see you next time.